Okay, so I've been thinking a lot about psychology and stuff for a long time, and also studying neuroscience and using computer science to sort of figure out how maybe our software works in our heads. And I've always been trying to find an easy way to explain everything. So my latest invention is sort of coming up with a simple system of characters that we play inside our heads, kind of like a video game. You get to choose different roles and they have different sort of skills. But yeah, they represent sort of different modes that we can go into psychologically. So if you're curious about what they are, here we go. So I'm going to start off with the structure of how I planned out these roles in the first place. Originally I was thinking there's a thinking and feeling kind, where it's sort of like in your head versus kind of in your body. And then I thought there's actually a third way of doing things, which is observing, which I've learned from mindfulness, where you're kind of just sensing things, but not really necessarily doing anything with them. At the same time, we can use these modes in sort of like an internal sense or an external sense, meaning we're either like looking inwards or looking outwards. Okay, so let's start with the first role, which is someone who thinks a lot about themselves internally. And I think of that as the philosopher. They're the ones who like to introspect and sort of look within themselves and figure out kind of how their logic works and their morality and how they see things and whether what's real and what's not, and so on and so forth. But they're willing to like sort of dig deep using a lot of their headspace and their logic to sort of figure things out. The next role is also kind of in your head, but when you're thinking outside of things, you think of it more like an analyst. You get a bunch of data and you're trying to like figure out what the rules of, say, society are when you're analyzing the stock markets or the economy or the government, or how people are doing and how they're voting. You kind of like try to come up with different reasons, and in the political sphere there's a lot of ideologies, or social science will try to explain like why they believe people act the way they do and make those choices, kind of like out in the world. And then when we kind of move down to this feeling part, I'm going to jump through past the observing for a little bit. When you're looking internally with your feelings, I believe you kind of get the artist. The artist is the one who kind of feels their feelings a lot, kind of inside of their bodies and their minds, and they don't quite know how to put it into words and logic because it doesn't quite fit. And it's true, our feelings are sort of this amalgamous, sort of multi-textured, multicolored thing that tends to come out better as like a piece of artistry. Like you can think of a movie, I love films, and they capture this whole story and this whole arc of how a feeling evolves and how it unfolds and stuff. Or like a piece of music, you can never use as many words as you want or as much logic as you want, but you can't explain how a piece of music really feels. You just have to feel it. So they're the ones who like take those feelings and kind of put it into something physical so that you can express it and share it with other people. When the feelings, the feeler, kind of goes outwards, you get the therapist. There's the ones who have a lot of empathy. They're the ones who like know what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes. They're the natural sort of listener who understands how somebody else is feeling, even when sometimes the other person might not know how they're feeling. But the other people's feelings end up sort of becoming their own, and that's sort of the nature of empathy, is that you feel somebody else's feelings, and that's why you can relate with it so well. Now for the interesting part is when we kind of get to the observing part, where it was sort of neutral. It's neither in your head or in your body. It's just sort of like all of your senses. You get sort of this mindfulness Buddhist thing going on. So I like the observing internally as the monk. when you're being mindful, you're really just observing how your mind is working without sort of necessarily being caught inside of it. The way I think of it is like we're an actor on a stage and we feel like these things are happening to us, but when you're mindful enough, you step off the stage and you're just watching sort of the scenes unfold. It's funny, a cousin recently asked me how to explain meditation and mindfulness, and I don't know, it's kind of a hard thing to explain without you doing it, but a lot of it is being able to sort of see the world as it is, like without layering on any labels or judgment or any sort of preconceived biases. Nothing is necessarily good or bad, it just is, including your own thoughts and your own feelings. When they pop up, they simply are, and the monk is able to just watch it without necessarily reacting to it. They don't need to analyze it, they don't need to express it. They just watch, and that's it. And then the outward version of that, I believe, is the scientist. I think this is why I like a lot of science YouTubers and explainers, because they kind of have this like innocent, sort of neutral nerdiness about them, and they're just generally curious and they have objective. They want to see things as they are, kind of like with the monk, but kind of outside of themselves. They'll look at things like rocks or fungi or animals or space and the stars very closely to see how they're actually behaving and how they actually work, without necessarily like putting any sort of preconceived notions and judgments on them. They just are observations and they are data points, and only when the data is sort of analyzed and broken down do we kind of come to like a conclusion based off like the puzzle pieces you get, instead of just assuming the puzzle gives a certain message or a certain viewpoint. They are willing to look into the world and measure and observe for data before they jump to any conclusions. So these are, I think, what the roles are in our heads. These are like different modes that we can go into. One mistake that people make when they do things like this, or the Myers-Briggs, the INFJ or whatever, they believe that they are just like one fixed type of personality. But with this model, I guess, I believe that all of these are parts of your mind, and we just switch between different roles in a given situation. Like we might be more of the analyst at work. When I'm breaking things down right now, I'm a little bit more of an analyst than the philosopher, trying to figure out how to explain things, how to reason through and logic through what these things mean, and put it into words. But at the same time, like when I was just going out for lunch, I'll kind of just be mindful and observe the world and not do anything. But I do like sort of going out and observing things and being curious as well. There's definitely an artist and a therapist within me as well. Like I played a lot of music and I like sort of setting up shots in photography a certain way, and I have been wanting to express my feelings. And I've also been there for other people, because I start understanding psychology better. I understand why people act the way that they do, and I start to empathize and be like, oh, they probably went through this or that, or the same sort of stresses that I've went through in life, and that's why they're reacting in this way. So we kind of jump back and forth between different roles. It's not like a video game where you're kind of like, you pick the whatever warrior class or the mage and then you're just stuck with it. This is different. I guess you can think of them as skill sets that you can move between them whenever you please. But depending on how you've lived your life, you're more likely to have one of these or a couple of these as the stronger ones. Like you might be more in your head or more of a feeler. I don't believe a lot of people grow up very neutrally. So this middle one tends to take some training to get into, like actual practice. But otherwise, I think we do have dominant modes. And that kind of shows us that maybe we need to pick up other skills in other areas to sort of balance it out. Because there's a second part to this, which is that all of these modes are kind of this matrix when you're kind of in a safe and comfortable spot and you're willing to explore and look at things. But when you're not in a safe place, when you feel like you're in danger or you're under threat or you're anxious, these roles kind of become something else entirely. So what happens when these roles pop out when you're kind of in a dangerous state, when you're feeling threatened, and you're not so calm and you're not so playful and explorative anymore? It tends to come out in a very different way. So going back to this first corner here, I think what we get is when you're thinking internally a lot, that's that voice that's constantly nagging at you. And I think we kind of fall into like a delusion that we think that that voice is telling us the truth and it's real. It's strangely, we don't think of it as like schizophrenia, but it's sort of like a separate personality and a separate like voice that you can't seem to turn off. And it's constantly like yapping at you, it's preaching at you, it's telling you like you're not good, you're bad, you have to do these things, these are the only way that we will fit in and that will have some worth. So it's sort of like throwing lessons at you. And if we kind of move out into the external world, I think what we tend to get is conspiracy or paranoia. Like you start to come up with reasons inside your head, which is the thinking mode, where you're constantly like pointing at certain things and finding patterns where there are none and seeing threats when there are none. When you're under that state where everything feels like a threat and everything feels like an enemy, you kind of get into a more dictatorial, a dictator kind of mode where you have a need to control everything. You want to control the information, you want to fight the enemy, you want to destroy the enemy. Sort of like that statement where you're sort of like if you're given a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And as we sort of move downwards, when you're kind of observing that neutrally as like the monk, it's a good thing because you can sort of see things and you can not put any placements on them, but you can still sort of live life and you enjoy it and it feels peaceful. But when it kind of comes from a dark perspective, the observing internal persona becomes like the detached hermit. They're the ones who like don't want to engage in the world anymore because they don't find any meaning in it. This is, I guess, where you find the people who are depressed and they sort of are withdrawn and they have no reason to do anything anymore because when they see it and there's no meaning anywhere, it just feels completely useless. It feels like a black void rather than, as the monk might have seen it, as like a gentle glow and the beauty of the world. They just see this as like everything is an illusion and it doesn't make sense to do anything, so I'm not going to try anymore. The same thing happens with the observing the external in the dark way. You get this cynic. It's sort of like that Camus with the absurdity, when everything is absurd and all of these bureaucracies and laws and rules and enforcement just kind of feels like a joke. Then I guess you kind of go into the Joker mentality where you're like, whatever, all the rules don't matter, so I can just sort of mess things up. It doesn't really matter what I do. Everything can't be trusted. So you don't believe in anything anymore or anyone anymore, and everything just seems sort of ridiculous and meaningless in a different way. When we feel strongly internally, this one I have trouble with, which is shame. I think when your feelings are so strong, everything becomes overwhelming because everything feels too big. And so we tend to withdraw kind of in a different way. It's like you still understand you need to sort of be out there in society. But I kind of like just don't want to anymore. It's just like I want to just run away from all of this stuff because it just feels awful, and I don't like being there, and I don't like playing that way. I don't like pretending. And so I guess the coward is sort of the way of avoiding all of that shame by just sort of tucking themselves away and never sort of like being able to express what they really feel or feel for themselves what they really feel, which is the opposite of the artist, because the artist just embraces it and embraces the danger and just sort of lets it out, whatever comes. But the coward will like avoid all of those feelings. And finally, we get the anarchist, which I also relate to. This is the ones where they blame everybody else. It's like a little bit like the conspiracy and the dictator, but when they feel so strongly and they feel bad, they just kind of want to blame and point the finger at everyone else. Everything else is what makes them feel bad, and they have nothing to do with it. So they might as well just watch the world burn. And I guess it's like that chaotic evil where there's just like, this is the true Joker who just wants to kind of experiment with society and mess things up and just see what happens, because their feelings are so strong that it's just projected onto everything else in the world. And nothing is sort of like pure or worth protecting. Let me bring back these other rules here. And I think that all of these rules are like a part of us. The sort of like the light and the dark version are just like opposite sides of each coin. So they're kind of flipped back and forth. And we each fall into certain roles and responses at certain times, because that's what we learned. Like that's how we learned the world is supposed to work. And those are the rules that we've incorporated, and that's how we feel about them. And those are like the mental skills that we've absorbed in our lifetime. But that also doesn't mean that necessarily these roles are fixed. Kind of like I said, it's not like you're picking a role. You are just having different balances between these different roles. And that also means that you're able to practice and improve the skill sets on one. Or if, for example, I have a little bit too strong of these feelings and these sort of blaming and hiding from feelings, and I tend to like lean towards reasoning, I can sort of move towards a more healthy approach of, doing more meditation and mindfulness and trying to be objective with myself and my own place in the world and how other people see me. I can also focus my feelings and write them out and care more about others, because when I care about others, it tends to make me feel better, because we all have the same problems. So the problems we sort of help in other people are the ones that we're helping within ourselves. So yeah, I don't think any of these are fixed, and you can like improve any of them. And if there are parts of yourself, we all have these dark sides, where if you don't like what you're doing, just continuing to do them just keeps you in that cycle. So you have to learn that there is like another side to things, because the longer we feel like we're in danger, the more like our bodies are riled up, and the more the feelings tend to actually control us. So as we move over sort of into this safe zone, it feels okay to like release and let go and not have to like protect and defend yourself anymore. So yeah, these are the characters I thought of in our minds, and maybe they're kind of crazy and maybe they don't make any sense, but if you've watched this at all, you have any thoughts, let me know. Some of them I kind of wish there maybe have been like better words, or maybe I don't quite find the right kind of character for them. But this was just, draft one, and this is what I've been thinking about. And I think there is more to this, and there's more other systems that I'm going to share later on. So if you're interested, just stick around and keep watching. Otherwise, thanks, and we'll see you next time.